everyone, welcome back to our Osprey video diaries. I'm Liv from Birds of Poole Harbour, and today it's been 2 weeks since CJ7 first arrived on the Osprey nest cam. We've been getting a lot of questions about LS7 and when he might return in our live Q&A chat on YouTube, and I'd like to give you a bit of information about translocation, how it works and when we might expect to see LS7 back in the harbour. But first things first, I'll fill you in a bit about what's been happening in the Osprey world in Poole Harbour this week. CJ7's had a bit of a busy one. She's been building up the nest still, but on Thursday we had an exciting time because we saw her feeding on another nest platform in the harbour that we've got a motion sensitive camera on, and suddenly another Osprey appeared on this nest as well. Judging by the picture that we got, we judged it to be a male Osprey. He was unringed, so we weren't able to identify him. He dipped back in twice while she was on the nest, but that was all we saw of him. Unfortunately, we think he passed back on through the harbour, probably heading to some other grounds in the UK. On Friday we had the first wet weather that we've had in a long time in Poole Harbour, so we saw a lot of CJ7 on the nest. Osprey's become fairly inactive during the rain, so we got a whole day of her just preening on the nest, which was really nice to see. This was before the excitement of the weekend where we had another Osprey come into the harbour. So on Sunday we were alerted to the fact that there was another Osprey in the harbour by someone who was out walking, but then we realised that it was circling over the nest with CJ7. So in this video, if you watch in the background, you can just make out two shadows circling over the nest, and we were really willing them to both land on the nest so we could see whether it was LS7, but it wasn't. This Osprey continued on through the harbour and we didn't get a chance to see whether it was male, female or who it could be, but it was exciting to see more Ospreys coming through again. So we've been getting a lot of questions asking why aren't these Ospreys stopping, why won't CJ7 just find another male in the harbour? So I'll explain to you a bit about why we need the translocation in Poole Harbour and what the translocation does and how it works to create a new population here. Translocation is a really important conservation tool which essentially involves moving individuals from a pre-existing population and transporting them and releasing them in a new area which usually had pre-existing populations there that were wiped out or severely reduced by things like persecution or habitat loss that has now been restored. So in the case of Ospreys, we know that they were historically persecuted all across Western Europe, which severely impacted their numbers, and by the 1840s they were extinct in England and Wales. While the population remained a little bit longer in Scotland, they were believed to be extinct by 1916, though we now know that there was possibly a couple of birds that hung on in the Highlands, but their numbers were so low that there were barely a population there at all. Very fortunately, Ospreys recolonised Scotland, which is really important because Ospreys have a particular tendency to return to the area that they fledged from, so you really need a pre-existing population to encourage them to come back to an area. Male Ospreys in particular are prone to doing this, though female Ospreys do it as well, and although some Ospreys don't do this, it is the general norm, so we know that this is a really important way of getting them to come back to an area. We also know that Ospreys form this bond shortly after fledging in a process called imprinting, where they learn to memorise the local area so that they can come back there when they're ready to breed themselves. Using this knowledge of Ospreys, we're able to complete Osprey translocation projects, which is exactly what we're doing on the south coast of England to encourage Ospreys to breed here. By removing Scottish chicks from their nests shortly before they fledge and releasing them in Poole Harbour, they imprint on this area instead, and hopefully in a couple of years' time after they've fledged, they will return back to Poole Harbour to breed instead of returning to Scotland, which is exactly what LS7, one of the released males, did in 2017. Ospreys really like to use established nests and will often return to the same nest year on year, and even take nests from other Ospreys, which causes a lot of competition during the early breeding season. One way of attracting Ospreys into a new area is by putting up man-made platforms, like we've done in Poole Harbour, where we've got over 10 platforms now. Another thing that attracts them in is by knowing there's an established population there, so us releasing juvenile Ospreys into the area is a pretty convincing way of saying that there's breeding Ospreys here. So CJ7 was rightly a bit confused and was drawn in by the juvenile Ospreys here, and now has been summering in the harbour ever since. Through CJ7 summering in the harbour, we advanced the speed of the project by tenfold. She was there ready and waiting for if a male returned, and of course when LS7 did, they started pair bonding immediately, which is really promising for this year. Last year, as LS7 was a young bird, he returned too late in the summer to breed, but this year he will be 3 years old, which means although he might return slightly later, there's still a possibility of him being able to breed. Now in 2020, we're watching CJ7 on the nest cam, building up and waiting for LS7 to return. If he does return in the next couple of weeks, we may see a nesting attempt, but if it's a bit later on, we can't expect a nesting attempt from them this season, but they'll continue to pair bond until their return next year. This is really good progress for the project, regardless of whether they breed or not, and all we can do is keep our fingers crossed for the return of LS7 in the next couple of weeks.